sure. This could be a 10-hour episode. I have a lot of questions still, but unfortunately,
yeah, I'd love to pick your brain more.
I grew up between 9 different cities and went to 10 different schools. Women are a minority in technology, and then also Arabs are. So it feels like you're sort of like a minority inside a minority. It's always important to remember that behind every success and every win, there's probably like 10 failures or like applications that don't even get acknowledged. And we're seeing a lot of big tech companies also saying things like your university degree, like it's not something that we look for when we're interviewing a candidate.
So why are you passionate about storytelling, and what is the importance of being really a good storyteller in today's world?
I want to know what you're most proud of. Like if you could give yourself a very small title, what would it be? Zain Masri is a marketing and mentor. She is currently the head of brand and reputation at Google in Middle East and North Africa. Zain is passionate about storytelling, technology, and Arab culture. She was selected as Forbes 30 Under 30, UN Women Gender Innovation Agora Advocate, and an IMF Youth Fellow. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zain. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben and Abdullah. I really appreciate your time, and I'm excited to be here. And thanks for the introduction and for hosting me.
Thank you for being here. So Zain, you have such an amazing story to tell, but to begin with, we just want to know a little bit about, how you started, where you graduated, how was your youth looking like?
Sure.
So tell us about that.
Sure. So I'll start with my youth and sort of go chronologically. So I'm someone who spent a lot of my childhood moving around from place to place along with my family. So I grew up between 9 different cities and went to 10 different schools growing up. That's roughly a different school every year, which had its challenges, of course, but also its perks. And so that was sort of a little bit on my childhood, spent between different countries and cities and different environments. And then for my university studies, I studied mass communication and media, which focused a lot on marketing and advertising. And I minored in psychology, and that was always an interest of mine. So I went on afterwards and I did a master's in psychology. And at the same time, I started an internship with Google, which was sort of my first step into technology and just the technology field. So I started off as an intern and then joined the team full time about 8 months later. And I've been at the company ever since. And that's been my journey so far.
That's great. Zain, you touched on being in different schools in different countries in the beginning. How important do you think that is when you go into big tech? The background it gives you on culture and diversity and talking to different groups of people.
Yeah, I think it's super important in many sectors, but maybe more in tech because tech is one of those sectors where you really deal with scale. So any feature, for example, that you work on or a program or a project, it's reaching millions of people. So just the idea of that volume, when you think about the impact, it's so powerful. And having a background where you worked or interacted with different cultures and people helps you put yourself in different scenarios. So it helps a lot, particularly in a field like technology where you're dealing with scale and just really large audiences. So it helps, it helps you come from that place of empathy and understanding. Yeah.
We always talk about that all the time. Yeah. Abdullah, you had something to say?
Yes. I wanted to ask about, so I've read a lot of your cool articles, I would say, and you mentioned, we have a lot of cultural barriers or stigmas. And I'm just curious to know, how did you overcome these barriers as a woman? Obviously you're in a very successful company now. So in your experience, how did you overcome these barriers, and what are these barriers, if you could shed some light on them?
Sure. So the main context these barriers were discussed in is this idea of like the gender gap, which is correlated with like a skills gap, for example, and it's correlated with other gaps in the workforce. So, for example, women participation in the workforce, how women are an underrepresented group when it comes to STEM, specifically in technology as well. So some of the barriers that I personally faced were just the decision of, for example, living abroad. So I moved when I did my university studies. I moved to the UAE, away from my family, and that in itself was a huge barrier that I had to overcome, with a lot of criticism about living abroad and then later on working abroad and deciding to stay abroad past university as well is like a conversation on its own, you know, like university sometimes is easier to explain in our culture, like she's studying abroad, but then the decision to stay in a different country was sort of a challenge as well, that I had to overcome and convince and explain. And yeah, so that's just a few examples. But if we were to speak more broadly about the gender gap and some of the barriers, culture is a big one, but there are other ones as well. So for example, we think of the gaps that I mentioned, whether that's gaps in education or skills, upskilling, or other challenges, like, for example, women are likely to face harassment, whether that's like on their commute to work or at the workplace. And there are many, many barriers that stand in the way of, you know, the gender parity or women joining the workforce, and culture becomes one of them. But there are many others, and kind of have to have that aerial view of understanding them in order to make progress in this space.
Right. And how do you overcome these challenges? Like just for women who are starting out their careers and they see all these stigmas, all these challenges, which I completely empathize with. I understand how challenging it is, but what's your advice to these women? Like, how do you overcome these challenges? Is it just a mindset shift? Is it just more awareness?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
So, so for me, how I personally overcame them that could apply to many people is I started to look at the big picture. So, so for me, instead of focusing on like, I want to work in this specific country, or I want to stay in this specific country, I started to look at it as like a bigger picture. So a 5-year plan. Where do I see myself in 10 years? How will the decision I make today affect that and affect the trajectory of not just me, but my family unit as well? So for example, is me moving to a specific country or looking into a specific career, how does that change my entire family's trajectory? You shouldn't look at things in a vacuum, because nothing ever happens in a vacuum. And at the end of the day, family is super important for someone like me. So I didn't want it to be like stubbornness or to lead from that place, but I wanted to lead from a place of how can I sort of pave the way for different members of my family as well. Just like, for example, my mom paved the way for me in a way, my grandma before her. So I tried to see things as a long-term play. And when I would have these conversations with my family, they would come from that place. They would come from a place of, you know, we invested so much in education, in learning, even outside of traditional schools, so extracurricular. So why stop here? Why not be part of changing the path for not just me, but for my future family as well, and for my sisters. So trying to see things from that level, that really helped me personally, and not coming from that place of like stubbornness or I want it, or like even a comparative place where so and so did it, why can't I do it? So instead reframing that and thinking of the future, thinking of how this decision could affect my family and some of the benefits of that decision as well. So that really helped me, taking a step back and seeing things from that view.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I do want to ask a follow-up question on that, because I think it's super important. So you're saying, you know, you got to be connected to something bigger, obviously, you know, not just competition, etc. Like in your situation, you're more, you were focusing on, you know, a better life for your family, for yourself, for your future, etc. So you've done a lot of things in your life. I'm just curious, like, what wakes you up in the morning? Like, what is the thing that really pushes you to do all these things? I'm just curious to know that. What pushes you really?
Yeah, so I'm just going to come back to this idea of family when it comes to this, because like I said, like growing up in all these different places, it made family the only constant for me. So, you know, when you move to place to place, whether that's going to a different school or a different city, a different area, it means starting over from scratch. And it means learning how to do that time and time again. And from that, I learned that family for me was the only constant. You know, sometimes it's harder to form like social bonds because it's only a matter of time before, you know, we move again and start over again. So for me, family was the only constant. And to today, I see it that way, as family first, you know, as cheesy as it sounds. So I I do think about my family a lot. I think about how I could help, my sisters find, their next opportunities. I think of it as family is really what drives me. And I know that every day, if I go to sleep knowing my family is safe and healthy, that's enough for me. And that keeps me going. And at the end of the day, that's what matters the most for me personally is making sure my family is safe and healthy, and that whatever I do somehow positively benefits them, and I can pass on whatever benefits I have to them, and make sure that the pathway is kind of open for my sisters, for example, and my younger brother. So yeah, family.
That's beautiful. That really is. You touched a lot on family, and you said that this is, what wakes you up in the morning, and you can see a lot of things that you have next to your title, next to your name, that we would like to touch a little bit on. So it says you're head of brand and reputation at Google, and when we hear that, we're like, wow, she's working at Google. It's really cool. So we want to know a little bit, like, you started as an intern in Google. After that, did you get, any stigma for being a girl, for having not studied something that's super technical, in the workplace, or, from the industry? How was it when you first started?
Yeah, so one of the challenges in not just being a woman in tech, but also being an Arab woman in tech, women are a minority in technology, and then also Arabs are. So it feels like you're sort of like a minority inside a minority. And one of the challenges there is really limited role models. And when you're in that position, you understand the value of role models. Maybe it's not something that you think about, regularly or even growing up. But when you're in that position where you feel like an underrepresented group, which is a term that's become like widely used nowadays, but only when you're in that situation do you start to realize the importance of having that role model. So I'd say that was one of the challenges. And for me, the value of a role model is like this North Star. It's like someone that shows you that there's more than one way to be a leader. There's more than one way to be a person in technology. There's more than one way for success. And that's the importance of it. And not having that, or having like limitations when it comes to that, can be a challenge. And so you find yourself trying to get more creative with like identifying with different people, or borrowing from different stories, and trying to make your own, roadmap. So for me, that was a big challenge. Not only being a woman in technology, which, as we said, is like very underrepresented when it comes to STEM as a field, but also being an Arab in technology. I think there's some data around there's at least 7 million people in technologies, and in technology as a sector, and Arabs make up around 2%, which is very, very small. We still have a long way to go. So yeah, that comes with its own set of challenges, with representation, with role models, with trying to find your place and claim your space, and make sure that your voice is heard, and that feeling like your voice matters. So all of that, I feel, is connected with this idea of being a minority, let's say, in a certain field.
That's great. So how did you do it across the way? What you said about having a role model actually really resonates, and I think it's really important to have, especially when you're starting off and you want to see what other people are doing, and you want to have that, one person that you always go to. So what did you do in terms of, finding the right person to coach you?
So the first thing I did was try to reframe that idea of this North Star, or the concept of a role model. So instead of seeing it as, okay, there isn't someone that I can see this path that I can follow, it's not really as straightforward. So instead, I try to see it as there's no ceiling, there's no maximum, because there isn't someone from a similar background that reached that stage. So in a way, try to see it as, okay, maybe there's no ceiling. Maybe that's what it means not to have someone in that place. So that was the first step. The second step was, how can I borrow inspiration from different individuals, not just from the tech sectors, but maybe women who made it in other sectors as well. So think of the finance sector, the retail sector, many others, where women were able to achieve these high ranks and success, whatever that may mean to them, and learn from that. So there's a lot of like knowledge transfer and knowledge learning, and trying to expand the sources of that inspiration, where it's not just from a specific sector, open it up to others. And it's not just women from a specific background. Look at how, for example, Asian women in technology have made it, or Latino women or other minorities that made it, and getting inspiration from there. So broadening that scope and borrowing bits and pieces that resonate with me and using that in my path. So I'd say it's a mix of those two things. First, it's reframing that lack of role models into there's no ceiling. And so it's limitless. And then the second part is borrowing from different stories, and taking that into account when I think of my journey and what's next for me. So it's a mix of those things. And then the final step is, you mentioned coaching or mentorship, and that's super important. And I would say, like, even before looking at a coach, it's identifying allies. So finding an ally is someone who's a sponsor, an advocate, a coach, like all in one. For me, and that's super important. And in a field like technology, you need those allies. You need to, like, when you walk into a room, make sure you have that, relationship or bond with someone even beforehand, and investing in those allies, even when you feel like you don't need to at the moment, but it's important in the long term. So finding those allies really helps.
Awesome. Let's circle back a bit to your your journey at the beginning when you joined Google. I read your article about the path to Google, and I loved it. There are a lot of stories, a lot of things to learn from it. So could you tell us more about how did you get into Google? This is a dream, not just for women, for men, for everyone, just to get into Google. So how did you get into it? I know that you did an internship, but could you tell us more about, like, the
Sure,
details that
the background.
The backgrounds, yeah.
Yeah. So my first experience with technology was actually while I was a student. So while I was doing my bachelor's degree, I had this one professor who was, I was studying marketing, but at the time, like, digital marketing wasn't really a field that was taught. So it was sort of this, like, new thing, and it wasn't very commonplace to get a degree in it, or like that intersection between technology and marketing wasn't something that was taught in university at the time. It was still very new. But he encouraged us to look at learning opportunities outside of our curriculum. So through him, I learned about a student program that Google was offering called the Online Marketing Challenge. And it wasn't part of our curriculum, but he just shared the link, and he said, like, this opportunity is open to students if someone is interested. And I started reading more and more about it. And at the time, it was about, like, finding a business and supporting that business through running an ad campaign for them and learning the basics of online marketing through this challenge. And I participated in it. And that was my first step. It was like a student program that Google was offering to any university student around the world. And that was the first moment that I felt like a company like Google, which is so far away, I felt like maybe it's within reach, and through these experiences, I can somehow be a part of it. It just felt like it was so far away, but all of a sudden, through this one, like, student program, I was in some form associating with that world, learning about it, participating in it. And that was the first step. And then ever since then, like, I kept it in the back of my mind. I would try to learn about the different tools and programs that it offered. And at that time, they didn't have a big presence in the region. So my learning about their work in the region was limited, but I did my best to, like, follow up with the blog and the social accounts and things like that, just to learn about it. And because I was following up the news, I came across this other student program called the Google Ad Camp, which is this, again, program for university students where they would select around 30 students and fly them to the headquarters in Dublin, and they participate in this immersive training. And I really wanted to be a part of it. And they had this long application process for a student program, but, like, filling in different essays and getting references, and it felt like you were applying for, a job in a sense. But I really wanted that, and I leveraged the knowledge I had from the Online Marketing Challenge, things I learned in my degree and that kind of thing, and I applied, and they selected me. And I was the first Arab woman to be selected. It was the first cohort, So that meant a lot for me as someone who never really studied online marketing and technology in general. So that felt like a major validation. And I used every minute of that program to just like make the most of that experience, because I didn't know if it would be my last experience with them in that capacity. So so I did that, and then I would keep an eye out for roles. At that point, I had graduated from a bachelor's degree, kept an eye out for roles. Like I said, the presence in the region was very small, so there wasn't much there. I took on a role in media planning and like a media, like marketing type of agency at the time. And I started doing my master's degree part-time. And then finally, there was a role which was an internship role, which was a huge risk for me because I had a full-time role at the time. I'm trying to be financially independent as well, because aside from me, my parents also have my two sisters and a younger brother who's like 13 years younger than me. So they still had a huge burden in a way financially, and I wanted to be independent. And so I took on this internship, which was in a way a big risk for me financially, and like in terms of stability and my visa and all of that. But I sort of took this chance, and thankfully it paid off. I did an internship for 8 months, and then after that a role became available, and I worked super hard to throughout the application process, and again leveraging the network of allies that I had and learning from them, best practices, getting advice, working on myself beyond my role as well helped. So that's the background. That's how it started. It started off as a student. I always admired the company, but thought it was so far away, like really distant, like almost unattainable. And so I wanted to find these opportunities that would just bring me a step closer. And every opportunity I tried to make the most of it, because in my mind I'm like, maybe this is my last chance, maybe this project, maybe this training, maybe this internship would be my last chance. So I just wanted to like stretch those opportunities so much and make the most of them. And I think that's what helped me, because it showed that I was passionate. I was really interested in the topic. I was willing to learn something that's quite far away from what I was initially like studying, and so I think that also gave me an edge in a way. But yeah, it was sort of a long journey from student to intern to full time, and to where I am now.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. That's amazing. And I think the key takeaway from this, at least for me, is the more you put yourself into different situations, the more opportunities you're going to get. I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of people think of this as luck, but I think it's more of putting yourself out there and trying different things, which really, in your case, this is what landed you a job in Google, because you've just participated in these programs, these
yeah,
AdWords
100%.
programs. Yeah,
Yeah,
I just really resonate with that. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
yeah, I completely agree with you, Abdullah. Like putting yourself out there, it can really make or break things for you. And it's always important to remember that behind every success and every win, there's probably like 10 failures or like applications that don't even get acknowledged, or get flat out rejected. Because behind every win, there's a ton of those. But you never know until you try. You never know. You'll never win until you put yourself out there and you be in that vulnerable position. And just remember that behind every win, there's a bunch of rejections, a bunch of like failures and losses, and that's just part of the process. So yeah, I fully agree with what you said.
Yeah, I find it really awesome how you were able to identify opportunities at such a young age and then take the risk to leave your job and get into the internship. On that, if you can just highlight what you actually learned during this experience, because I know how frustrating it is to finish your bachelor's degree, and around that time when you're trying to apply to jobs, especially when you're looking for a really good company. And many of us graduate and think Google is so far-fetched, or Microsoft is very far-fetched, or and then you start going after it and you realize you can do it, and you can
Yeah,
actually be what what you want at an early stage, and you don't need to wait until you get a lot of experience that just loses its whole thing. So if you can just share some tips to the youth that are starting off at this stage in their life.
Okay, so the first step is putting yourself out there and knowing that the road to wins or like to success is paved with a lot of hardship and loss as well. So just knowing that that's part of the process and embracing that, or at least trying to normalize it and know that there's a bigger picture. So even if you don't get this opportunity, you know, there's this concept of law of abundance, and it started off as like this idea that there's enough money to go around, there's enough wealth to go around, but you can also apply it to opportunities. It's like this idea that there are enough opportunities to go around. You just have to spend that time finding them and putting yourself out there. And it's hard and it's vulnerable, but it's part of the process. So that's the first step. The other step, which is something that, you know, having started my path in technology at such a young age, it's something I wish I had learned early on, which is this idea of finding yourself and knowing who you are outside of your day job. And that means not trying to attach yourself to a specific company, role, project, person, and knowing who you are outside of that and investing in yourself outside of that. Because if you do that, then you kind of reach this place where you are aligning other things to yourself, to your purpose, to your values, to who you are, instead of vice versa, instead of always trying to fit in a specific place or attaching yourself so much to a specific project or something that's just not sustainable. So I would say invest in yourself and learning who you are outside of a job. So before being fixated on, I want to make it in a specific field, job, I want to take on a specific role, learn who you are outside of it and how your values align with that company or that job. I feel like people these days, like the idea of being in a company has changed so much. You know, back in the day, the main thing was, I want to join a company because I want to make money. Then later on, people started to think that's not enough. I want to feel more creative, for example. But I feel like we reached a point now where I want to work in a place where my values align. And we've seen it time and time again where employees would come together when they feel like companies aren't living to their values, for example, and they would come together and make their voices heard. And that to me shows that our values as people, it's important that they align with what we're doing day to day. You know, we spend 8 hours a day, 5 times a week, at least in these jobs. And so knowing who you are outside of them and then finding your place and making sure that those values align with what you're doing day to day is another piece of advice I wish I had learned when I was, you know, growing up and studying. And so I would definitely lead with that. Spending the time investing in yourself and learning who you are outside of your job.
That's really valuable. Love it.
I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to ask, so what, why did you specifically choose marketing? I know you touched on that a bit, but the reason I'm asking this is a lot of people, and I say this a lot, don't really know what they like. They don't know what to study in university. They don't know what their passions are, etc. So I'm curious, how did you get into marketing? Why did you get into marketing? And do you think that you have to know what you like before you actually pursue a career, or is it just you can really become good at anything if you put in the effort? What's your take on that?
So my take is the latter, what you just mentioned. Like you can, I think that a lot of the skills, especially in today's workforce, are learnable. It's certainly the case for marketing. And for technology more broadly, a lot of the skills that you need to get into technology are now available in the form of like nano degrees, courses that you can take online. And we're seeing a lot of big tech companies also saying things like your university degree, like it's not something that we look for when we're interviewing a candidate. At first it was, we don't care about GPA as much. And then it became degrees, like as long as you have the skills and some experience in that space, it became like almost like superior to like having a degree in a specific field. So I think we're moving away from that idea of what you studied is what you have to end up working in, and you can't like deviate from that. I think that's becoming less and less common, that type of thinking. So for me personally, when it comes to marketing, I was interested in aspects of it. So at first I was interested in like the creative aspect of it and also the communication aspect of it. So this idea of like coming up with a message that resonates with your audience. I thought that was really powerful, especially when it's based on insights and like the research that comes with that. So initially I was drawn to that. But for me, when it comes to marketing in technology is very different. So just touching on that idea of like reaching people at scale. So this idea of like marketing to everyone and building products that work for everyone. The definition of marketing becomes much more broad. It's no longer find that target audience and reach them with XYZ messages. It becomes how can I create something that benefits the largest number of people possible, that resonates with the largest number of people possible. And to do that, you have to build on this idea of helpfulness. So helpfulness has to be at the core of anything that you do. And I think that's the same for the tech sector across the board. If you're building from that place of helpfulness, then that sort of becomes like the driving force behind your work, as opposed to just this idea of I want to market a product. It becomes much bigger than that. So that was like initially what drew me to marketing, but I now realize that marketing in technology is a very different world. It's much bigger than the conventional idea of marketing.
100% agree. It's more about the stories you tell about a company, about a product. It's completely agree with that. Yeah, there's a very good book by Seth Godin. I think it's called Marketing. This is marketing, and it talks about marketing nowadays. It's more about storytelling about a specific company. It's not really this product does that. It's what story are you trying to tell, which is gonna bring me to storytelling. I know that's something you're very passionate about. So could you tell us more about that? Why do you think? So why are you passionate about storytelling, and what is the importance of being really a good storyteller in today's world?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I've been into storytelling in different forms, even like growing up. So I used to write like stories about my pets at the time, and like coming up with these like wild ideas and stories that I would tell my sisters, for example. And but as I grew up, I started to realize the power of storytelling in other forms. So I had a professor that would always remind us of this, like, I think it's a famous quote, but this idea that a story is the shortest distance between two people. So it's this idea that no matter where you are in the world, sometimes that common story, that common experience can bring you closer to a person in a way that proximity and culture and all these other differences can't bring you together in that way. So that's sort of one part of it. The other part of it has to do with this idea of representation that we briefly touched upon in this session. So this idea that when you tell your story, you sort of stretch culture. And what that means is different terms that you associate with. So like in my case, it's like Arab, woman, person in technology, like all these different terms or labels that you have. When you tell your story, those terms become stretched so that their definition or what people think of when they think of these terms becomes like wide enough to include you and to include your story. So that way, when you're stretching culture in that way or these terms in that way using storytelling, those ideas or those terms become so wide that they can embrace different people, different groups, different stories. And so I really believe in the power of storytelling in that sense, because it takes these labels and it makes them broad enough and more inclusive for other people as well. So that's just a little bit about that. And what I've been specifically interested in when it comes to storytelling is using it as a way for personal branding. So personal branding is your way of telling your story in the work context, in the workplace context, in your career. And so how can you use that idea of storytelling, beginning, middle, and end, climax, and inflection point, all those points that come into storytelling, how can you use that to tell your story? I think that's there's a lot to be said in that space, and it's really powerful when you know how to use that tool. So it's not just relevant in the traditional sense of gathering and telling a story, but no, it's also when it comes to your career, knowing how to tell your story is a very powerful tool that I'm still learning how to navigate, but I'm a big advocate of it because I see the benefits of it in many ways.
I see you put an effort in a lot of things. Like you can see the passion even when you talk about things, which I love. And it brings me to this point. You talked about, when you're telling a story, you're representing the minority of the minority that we talked about. Mm-hmm. Do you think that coming from this kind of background, this gives you more work? Like you actually need to stay up late at night and think about things to be creative in order to actually be an advocate and leave your and also like in the workplace, since you are a minority, do you think that you actually need to put in more effort to actually succeed and be known?
Yeah, definitely. I think that these different opportunities, let's call them like maybe personal branding opportunities or opportunities to really like share your voice, they don't come naturally or organically. You have to seek them and you have to put yourself out there. So you have to think of different ways to do that. So leveraging different tools like LinkedIn, for example, and going that extra mile in terms of posting, in terms of sharing your story, and finding these opportunities. So some of the opportunities you mentioned early on, like opportunities with the UN and the IMF, these opportunities, they don't just land in your lap. Or even early on when I was talking about the student initiatives, they weren't part of my curriculum. They were just like a suggestion that was, if you're interested, look into it. But you have to actually take the initiative and find these opportunities and leverage them and make the most of them. So yes, I do feel like I have to do that myself, because like many people, like these opportunities, they don't land in your lap. You have to sort of seek them and work on yourself and invest in yourself and invest in being a lifelong learner and having that attitude, even when it comes to opportunities. It's not just learning a skill, it's learning how to find these opportunities, how to pitch your story, how to share your insights and participate in knowledge sharing beyond what's part of your day-to-day. So yeah, I do find myself having to go that extra mile, and I think that's normal in a sense. But I highly recommend it. It's been really like life-changing for me, just being able to talk about my story, being able to participate in knowledge sharing, just like I benefited from people sharing their knowledge. I want to be a part of also sharing what I learned and being fully transparent about it, including difficulties and the hardship that comes with it. And I think that's something I wish more people would do, and anyone can, because it's priceless. Like, it doesn't cost anything to write a post or to share it or to mentor someone. Like, these things are free, but they make the world of a difference for someone else.
Yeah, I think it's as you said, it's a matter of putting yourself out there, whether it's in person or even online. 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've obviously progressed a lot in your job, and I wanted to ask, so what do you think are the key traits for you to really progress fast in your job? I think looking at your resume, you've progressed pretty fast. So I'm sure you have a thing or two to share, or maybe a tip or two on how to really progress in your job. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so technology is a very unique case, because technology changes every day. There's new features, new programs, new companies, launching almost on a daily basis. So you have to embrace that spirit of lifelong learning, which is something that takes a while to instill, but it's something that you could definitely embrace at any point in your life. So this idea that I'm going to spend X amount of hours a month learning something new, upskilling, and there's no shortage of like resources that you can find online, many of which are free. So this idea of lifelong learning is one key to that, and being open to and resilient when it comes to all these changes. So being able to adapt to those changes as they come, and part of it is being that lifelong learner and knowing that the learning just never stops in a field like technology. You can't afford to stop learning. So that's one. The second one is what we spoke about when it comes to investing in yourself outside of your job. And that includes knowing who you are, trying to identify your values, trying to identify what makes you like your personal brand, basically outside of your role, and knowing how to highlight that and how to share it is very important. And then the third point is about allies. Allies is walking into a room and knowing that you can connect with different people in different ways, and investing in those relationships. And allies come in many forms, from mentors to sponsors, to advocates, to managers, family members. I keep hearing about this idea of like having a board of directors for your personal brand. And in a way, your allies could be that people who you can be honest with, people you can troubleshoot with, people you can bounce ideas off of, and connect with in many different ways and learn from, of course. So those would be the main things I would focus on. And all these things are free. So it's just about prioritizing them and seeing things in the big picture, knowing that these are all like stepping stones and smaller things that you need to do that really help give you that push and can accelerate your career.
You have very valuable advice, Zain. I would stay all day here talking to you, but really, I'm not.
Yeah, thank you so
It,
much again for the
it's
opportunity.
true.
Yeah, no, for
We
sure.
we
This could be a 10-hour episode. I have a lot of questions still, but unfortunately,
yeah,
yeah, it's
I'd love to pick your brain more. But
Anytime. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
I just want to ask one last
Yeah,
question.
yeah, go
Like
for it.
you have a lot of cool stuff on your resume and in your career.
Mm.
I want to know what you're most proud of. Like if you could give yourself a very small title, what would it be?
Okay, so most proud of. So I'd say like getting my first job after graduating. So when I graduated, I was 20 years old. I like compressed my university degree to the point where I was able to graduate a bit earlier, and I wanted to get that sense of independence and feel that validation where after all these years of studying, I'm able to get a job. And I just remember feeling that sense of pride when I got my first job. There are other moments like getting the internship, for example, that I just remember instantly after getting the email, calling my parents and telling them, and they were the first people I wanted to tell. And I think that's because like their pride or like making them proud means so much to me. And those are the moments where I feel like I need to pick up the phone and tell my mom and dad that this happened. Those are the moments I'm most proud of, and I can hear like while they're talking like that smile, you can sort of hear it in their voice that they're smiling. And when I think back, those are the moments that make me most proud, not necessarily because of the accomplishments, because of that feeling of knowing they're proud of me and feeling like all of this was worth it. So those are the moments that come to mind, just because of that feeling. It's like how you felt at that moment, not necessarily the accomplishment itself, because it might those getting your first job is something that's become quite common, but just like that feeling of picking up the phone and telling them immediately and hearing that happiness through the phone it means the whole world to me. So
Yeah, that's what really matters in the end, I think. I
so
agree. That's beautiful. Very, very good answer. That's beautiful. So
yeah,
thank
thank
you
you.
again so much. We'd love to reconnect again and do more and more interviews with you, honestly.
I'm
yeah,
You've had
I'm here.
love
I'm
that.
here.
invaluable advice.
This is really a special episode, really close to my heart because we come from the same region, from the same country, and it's yeah, this is something very close to my heart. So I'm super excited to publish this. Just
Well,
thanks a lot
you.
for your time. A lot of people are going
Thank
to be
you.
excited for sure, and really
That
appreciate that.
that makes me so happy, and thank you again, Ben and Abdullah. I really mean it. Not just like for hosting me, but also for creating this platform. It's very important to have like a playlist. You're basically building a playlist and a platform for all of the different topics that we discuss, from underrepresented groups and minorities and just women. And that means a lot to someone in the industry like me. And I'm sure many people will benefit and continue to learn. And it means a lot that you considered me. So I'm very thankful for that. And I'm glad that it worked out and we were able to record the session. And I'm here for anything that I can help with, really.